March 7th, 2025. And as you could see in one of our opening shots, I found a book that fits the only DIY bookcase that I have that's the size for the overall project I have in mind. And that project is a case to keep junk journal signatures waiting to be bound that I have already worked on. So I will be making myself a junk journal workbook, if you will, where everything will just be bound together with probably a Midori cord binding as a workbook. Nothing will be sewn in. And then when I've finished a signature, I can take it out, put it in the bookcase, and pull out a fresh signature and continue on. The overall idea of this is that somewhere down the line, I'll have a little library of books that are all the same size and will be bound together as a library of my junk journals. And I've decided, having done junk journals over the year in various shapes and sizes, that I want everything for my own personal library to be uniform because I use a lot of book pages. So I've scuffed up my library case that you saw on Sunday, and I'm covering it with black tempera paint. I don't know what I covered it with originally. I don't think it was a real acrylic paint unless it was flat black. And even flat black acrylic paint has some shine to it. So I just don't know what I covered it with. But for recovering purposes, I am using flat black tempera paint, and it'll probably need two coats. The bottom of this box, or the back actually, that would be at the back of a bookshelf or up against a wall, never actually got finished 5, 6, whatever years ago. So we're going to use black as our canvas, and then from there we'll figure out how we want it decorated. Bringing out our book measures right a little past 6 inches and 9 by 9 inches, typical beach novel size. Now this book is in really good condition, so getting the text block out by running a blade down that gap between the text block and the book boards is how you remove it, and you have to be careful. And because I was on camera, I wasn't careful enough. I ended up cutting through the spine, I think on the back side on the second cut. And so I ended up cutting my book boards apart, as you will see. It's a little disappointing, but it's not the end of the world. We'll just make a new spine, and that gives us an opportunity to reinforce the junctions between the spine and the book boards. If it happens to you, it's not the end of the world. You'll just have to do an extra step or two. And because I did it, you get to see that extra step. So we get the book apart and we can see I've made a mess of it. It's not a big deal. If you're new here, thank you for stopping by. If you've never seen my channel before, it's primarily DIY. And we occasionally go in the kitchen. We always make a big mess, despite the best efforts not to. And usually in the beginning of the year, I do paper craft, and it's usually junk journals because of Junk Journal January, which is now, more than a month past. But you can always go into the January Junk Journal playlist on this channel and see past journal makes and how I did what I did. I have shown how to make book covers from scratch using the chipboard that you have in cereal boxes. That's what cereal boxes are made of, chipboard. So if you don't have a book that you can cut apart, you can cut a large cereal box to the dimensions that you want to use. And I always use almost the whole cereal box because I cut 4 of the same size panels from the cereal box to use for my book boards, and I glue two together. So I end up with two book boards that are almost as strong as if I cut apart a book like this. So I fix my mistakes and I'm cleaning up my edges. I get a little fussy about it here. I probably didn't need to be, but creature of habit, I guess. So we're going to replace our spine with chipboard from a cereal box. And it's very easy to do. You have to decide how wide do you want your spine. And I have a tendency to use my mat to line things up, as you can see. And that will tell me roughly if I measure it correctly and if I place it correctly. It will tell me roughly how wide to cut my cereal box, which you'll see in a minute. I've determined that I want my spine to be 1.5 inches wide. That's pretty much a standard measurement for me if I'm not making a super wide book or what have you. Now, I'm doing minimal measuring here, and I should correct myself and say for the spine, I'm using an end panel from a giant sized Cheerio box, and that will give me plenty of room to make the spine tall enough, and then I can just cut it right in half and glue the two halves together. There's a little excess trimming that you'll see me doing, but for the most part, it only takes one really big cereal box to do this. And so I'm cutting off the excess length here, and then I'll go to cutting this side piece in half. For those of you new to junk journal making or with little experience, I'm using some shortcuts and I'm speeding this up because this is not a tutorial. For example, this is silicone glue. It's made by Beacon, and I like to use it when I'm making pieces out of a cereal box so that I don't have to rough up that printed face at all. And I can just glue it. I like to glue the glossy sides together so that whatever paper I have going over these chipboard pieces, you're not going to see yellow background. You're not going to see floating Cheerios or anything like that. It's just going to be a uniform background. If you're going to invest in anything and you're trying to decide between inks or paints or dyes or what have you and tools, my personal default is always buy the tools first and then buy the consumables. And the consumables are the things you have to replace. Printer, ink, paper, cardstock. What I'm going to use to strengthen this spine is drywall tape. And a big roll will go on forever and ever and ever. What I'm using right there is a good tool. It is a bookmaker's tool, and you can turn it up on its end. It has several functions, and you can turn it up on its end like that to space your spine and end book boards. There is also a tool that we made. Don't throw away the sides and flaps of your cereal boxes because the end flaps, the ones that are on the short side, you can glue 4 of them together and you will have a tool for spacing that is almost exactly the same width as the bookmaker's tool. So there's a way to save a little money. Lots of people use gauze for this. I like scrim tape for drywall because it comes in a 2-inch roll. I can cut it down if I want to, or I can use it and create a nice bridge between my spine and my book boards. And as you can see, my camera quit again. Not to worry, fresh batteries, and we're back in business. Now, I'm going to use a piece of old bedsheet fabric to cover my book boards on the inside where they meet my spine, mostly for cosmetic purposes, not really so much for strength. I'm going to use art glitter glue here. I've had this bottle for a long time, probably 4 years. Haven't hardly used any of it because I have a flat cap, not a needle nose cap. I did buy needle noses and found out that they didn't come with any kind of adapter, so I'm just going to brush it on. And the reason I'm using art glitter glue is because allegedly it dries really fast. We'll see if that's true or not, and if it is true, we'll probably go on to a little bit more construction. If not, we may be ending this video a little short. Nevertheless, um, it went on smooth. I brushed it on, and it went on very smooth. It goes through that mesh scrim tape beautifully right down to the cardboard, and you can see that I've left gaps on either side of my book boards because I used my spacer tool, and I expect that this will turn out just fine. I'm not going to do the outside of the spine because I don't really know right now what I'm going to use for an outside cover. And I just respace it there with my bookmaker's tool, by the way, to reinforce those gaps so that the spine will be flexible. And right on cue, my heater goes on. So I apologize for that roaring noise, but it can't be helped. I did put on my ubiquitous blue hoodie so that I could turn the heat down and not have it go on, and it still went on anyway. So nevertheless, we just keep going, and I'm smoothing out a little bit there. We're going to glue down the other side, weighting that piece of fabric down with my bookmaker's tool, and then we will set this aside to dry as well. We might even set this aside for a week or two before we work on it again, because I have a second journal to make, and that is the workbook journal. This is a binding journal. Once I finish a signature with its decorations and whatever projects I do, it will go into this journal as a permanent signature. Setting all that aside to dry, we have the next question of the workbook and what pages. And this is a 8.5 by 11 piece of typing paper folded over. It's got some lines printed on the inside. Here's another one that I've cut down so it's not quite that big. And I'm sticking with half-page format, which is why I wanted a specific size box and a specific size of cover for the final binder, which we just set aside. And now I'm doing the same for the workbook. In theory, the easiest way to make folios or signatures, I should say, is to just fold copy paper in half. Set your printer to 0 border, and you should have minimal, if any, white edges. Now, sometimes you can fix that with just some shading or some word strips or some other kind of decoration. But when it comes to book pages are not all created equal. And so to get as close to 5.5 by 8.5, the book pages will have to be trimmed at least on one side and to get them to the 5.5 width, and then I will have to hinge them together. And the same goes for the handmade paper. I've only pulled out 2 pieces at this point because I don't really know how much I want handmade paper in this example. I may do a whole section with handmade paper, but keeping in mind, my handmade paper decal edge to edge is 5 by 7, which means my paper, by the time it dries thoroughly, shrinks a little bit. It has raggedy edges, and I need at least one straight edge on each piece to use as a hinge. And here's that step. I've already glued my brown paper hinge piece down to the first, and this is accordion folded. You've seen me do it before. And now I'm gluing down the second piece of book page to that hinge to make a double page that lays out flat and is approximately the size of 5.5 by 8.5. It's actually a little longer because the book I tore these out of is a little taller. I'll worry about trimming everything to the same length later on. I'm going to set this aside to dry and move on to another piece of the project.
I've cut apart my cereal box. Let's move the debris out of the way and do our final measurements. I have already glued two pieces, shiny advertising sides together. So I have a nice clean palette, and I've cut where I want my spine to be. I did not cut them apart in this one because I'm just going to use those score cuts as my hinge, and I'm going to cover it with some scrim tape, just like you saw me do in the previous one, although right at the moment I am cutting down these book boards to length, and I'm cutting them to 9 inches. So my book will be 9 inches tall. In doing so, I am making the maximum size my pages can be, as far as length, stop at 8.5 inches. So I have a 1/4 inch on the top and a 1/4 inch on the bottom on the book boards to center my text block or signatures. We're speeding through the rest of this because when I pasted these together, I had some little bit of drift, and I'm probably being too much of a fusspot over the book boards not meeting exactly, so I'm just trimming it down so they do meet exactly. Now we've got our trusty scrim tape out, and we're going to reinforce the outside and then lay down some of that same old bedsheet fabric on both the outside and the inside, glue it down, and then I'll be able to wait until it's dry, and then we'll evaluate what we've gotten done. We've got quite a few things drying right now, so I think we're going to call it here. We're just a little over 15 minutes for this show, and our hardback bookboard book. There is the outer bridge between the spine and the two book boards. The orange one is still drying, so I don't want to mess around with that too much. Just behind it, our case for our journals is dry, and I think I'm probably going to go on a big hunt for some fancy paper, antique paper for the outside of it. Down front there is the working journal that we just cut the cereal box apart and reassembled it together. So we've gotten as far as I want to go right now, since the two journals are, the spines are still drying.
Thank you for stopping by. I'm always glad to see you. And thank you for going on this little storage journey with me that has lasted, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 weeks now. God bless you. See you real soon.